The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There's a few Republicans that strangely, suspiciously, for some reason, all of a sudden are in love with the idea of over-the-counter birth control. We're talking about Cory Gardner from Colorado, North Carolina House Speaker Tom Tillis, businessman Mike McFadden, a Republican from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Rob Maness from Louisiana, all have come out in support of over-the-counter birth control, and they are all part of the same party, the Republican Party, which is about restricting access to birth control. So why might they do this when it conflicts with their evangelical religious right beliefs? Well, first and foremost, they all happen to be running for Senate, mostly in purple states, not in decidedly red states, with the exception of Louisiana. Of course, that is a region of Louisiana where he is up against this a series of Republicans, and maybe this could be a way to kind of separate himself. So why the sudden support for over-the-counter birth control? If you look at the data, it becomes kind of clear. Back in 2012, President Obama happened to win among women voters, even in states where he lost overall. So it's abundantly clear that public opinion on this issue is shifting away from this hardline anti-birth control position to one that actually supports access to birth control. The only problem is supporting over-the-counter birth control may not be that great of a thing, because as many insurance policies only cover prescription medications, not over-the-counter, by making this an over-the-counter medication, you can, on the one hand, appear to kind of publicly support what seems to be the predominant female position on this issue, while at the same time restricting access in the sense that you are removing birth control from the covered by insurance world and putting it in the you've just got to pay for it world. So, Lewis, it's almost like evil genius what's going on here.
Yeah, it's an interesting game that a lot of these politicians are playing. Let's just hope that if this stays, is an over-the-counter thing overall, that we can get some of the cheap stuff from India, right? Yeah,
I guess that maybe is kind of a funny thing to think about, but if you seriously think about this, the Association of OBGYN said the other day that whether a drug is or isn't over the counter should be only a medical issue and not a political one. In other words, what do Senate candidates know about the confluence of risk factors, the possibility for counterindications mixed with other medications, and all of the other medical factors that go into determining whether something should be over the counter or not? What do they know, right? In other words, it's becoming a political issue used to kind of position themselves in the exact right sweet spot between women and their white male base, when really these are medical issues that should be decided only by medical professionals. The boat has long sailed on anything related to sexual health being merely a medical issue.
Think about all the categories that we can compare, to this one, that politicians are deciding things on despite having no knowledge about it and listening to a very small amount of people, and in many cases who are just experts from big companies, quote, who are trying to influence them, for money reasons.
It's sickening. When you hear about such a drastic 180 from politicians, always try to figure out whether it's merely political posturing. It often is. We have an incredible show for you today on this Friday. We will take a break and we will get right into it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is supported in part by liberalbias.com. Did you know that study after study after study has shown that increasing taxes on the rich does not kill jobs? Weird, isn't it? The only possible conclusion is that the word study itself is liberally biased. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is James Sitnick. James Sitnick is doing his part, voting with his dollars, a supporter of this program, and keeps us completely independent from the influence of big corporations and media conglomerates. You can join James and become a David Pakman Show member, the long list of member benefits that comes with it, by going to davidpakman.com/membership. Lewis, it's time for This Week in Show History. And 4 years ago this week, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer had her famous meltdown during a debate. I have the clip. I warn you, it is cringeworthy. Take a look.
We have done everything that we could possibly do. We have did what was right for Arizona.
Immediately after the debate, she was confronted by a reporter who asked about her comments on decapitated immigrants in the Arizona desert. She ignored it and instead just cited a talking point. It didn't stop her from doing well in her gubernatorial re-election campaign, considering the number of completely incompetent politicians. There are actually surprisingly few meltdowns like this at the high level. I feel, Lewis, like it's really good for everybody when there's a meltdown like this, because it's good, well, good for everybody but that candidate, I guess we could say, because it's good for media. It's good for people to get more engaged in politics because, you know, when we hear about like the rent is too damn high guy, remember that guy? People who don't normally care about politics start paying attention, and some fraction of them probably keep paying attention. And it's also good for the opponents of the candidate. So there's a lot of good that happens when somebody has a meltdown like this. Probably not that good for Jan Brewer, though.
Well, you look at Jan Brewer and you look at Sarah Palin, and unfortunately, there are a lot of people who, when they see their politician having a meltdown or being the victim of gotcha journalism.
Right. Like being asked to name something they read.
Yeah, there's another great meltdown. They feel sorry for them. They feel compassion for them. And it I think in a lot of people, it reinforces their confidence in that politician for some ridiculous reason.
There's also, of course, the Rick Perry meltdown during a presidential debate. Take a look at this.
And I will tell you, it's 3 agencies of government when I get there that are gone. Commerce, education, and the, what's the third one there? Let's see.
You need 5.
Oh, 5,
Yeah,
okay. So
5.
Commerce, education, and the
EPA?
EPA, there you go. No, okay.
Let's stop deposition.
Seriously? Is EPA the one you were talking about? Or?
No, sir. No, sir. We were talking about the agencies of government. EPA needs to be rebuilt. There's no doubt about that.
But you can't name the third one?
The third agency of government,
Yeah.
I would do away with the education, the commerce, and let's see. I can't. The third one I can't. Sorry.
I am personally, Lewis, very much looking forward to the next presidential election because who knows what the meltdowns will be like.
I can say with certitude that the meltdowns and video clips from presidential campaigns far outweigh any benefit from an actual presidential candidate, one you want in office or not.
I'm not even sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying that whoever's elected in the end doesn't make that much of a difference?
Well, I'm saying that whoever ends up in the White House, the audio snippets and video clips and meltdowns we have from the campaign trail are just better than whoever is in the White House.
I see.
What happens during the election is better than the result of the election.
Okay. That's I think now that's the clearest that you've been about what you mean, because I wasn't.
It was hard to phrase.
Yes, indeed. 2 years ago this week, California Proposition 37, which would enforce the mandatory labeling of genetically engineered food, had opposition to the tune of tens of millions of dollars from big food and agriculture corporations. It was ultimately rejected in November of 2012. And as of November 6th of 2012, almost $10 million had been raised in support of labeling and $46 million spent in opposition. Monsanto alone investing $8 million. bills for GMO labeling have been introduced in 30 states. Now, Lewis, when we talked about this 2 years ago, I didn't necessarily realize that the entire GMO thing would become such a hot button issue, even amongst the viewers that generally agree with us. Our position has been, we are for GMO labeling if we can kind of clearly determine what we mean by GMO, which I think we can. We consider that a separate issue from the health benefits or risks associated with the eating of genetically modified food. And we've taken a lot of heat for that. Some of our viewers who seem to be kind of more pro-science oriented saying, you know what, I'm not falling for just flat out conspiratorial websites that say obviously eating GMO food is bad. I want actual studies, and I think it's important to separate the labeling issue and the effect of big agriculture on the economy. We need to separate those concerns from from eating GMO foods. And others who say, David, you're out of your mind. Obviously, it's unhealthy to eat GMO. So internally, even amongst our audience, we see a huge disagreement on this issue.
Yeah, I think that there might even be a way to genetically modify food to make it even healthier. But of course, I'm going to assume Monsanto is just doesn't care about any of that. So I'm very skeptical about GMOs at the moment.
All right. And certainly this is also, let me mention again, a separate issue from food labeled as all natural, which remember, natural, unlike organic, is not even a regulated term. And you can have natural foods, Lewis, that, as we covered in the past, have castoreum, also known as beaver anus. Or some kind of beaver anal fluid, I guess, in the interest of accuracy, and that's still all natural, right?
Yeah, it just there's so little regulation and oversight, and when we're looking at the ingredients on food, artificial flavoring could be any number of things, including beaver ass.
Natural flavoring, you mean?
No, artificial flavoring.
It could be both.
Yeah, either way.
Even more interestingly, it could be considered either, depending on who you talk to. 1 year ago this week, Dennis Rodman announced that he would be writing a book with his buddy Kim Jong-un from North Korea. He had been asked to train the North Korean basketball team. He came back. There were insane interviews. He was then later kicked out of North Korea for vomiting and defecating all over the hotel where the team was staying. Who could have predicted, Lewis, 5 years ago when we were thinking about the future of relations with North Korea and what would happen, who could have even remotely thought maybe somebody like Dennis Rodman will end up becoming personal friends with Kim Jong-un, or maybe at the time Kim Jong-il, showing up, and then the friendship would be troubled because of drunken vomiting and defecation. I mean, it's too weird to even be believable as a kind of slapstick comedy script.
Yeah, if this had never happened, and I told you that this was happening, you would have laughed and told me I have a ridiculous imagination and that there's no way any of this is true. And I wish we could just sit down with both of them and get the exact story of everything and make a motion picture out of this.
Yeah, no, it would really make a good... Now that we know that it's actually not that far-fetched, it would make a good movie. I did read, though, Lewis, I didn't see this, that recently Dennis Rodman said he was never going back to North Korea.
He apologized for the whole thing. He was kind of teary-eyed, and he vowed never to return to North Korea. And
that's a shame. I hope he does return.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like it's over. I hope these two great friends can reunite. Maybe if Mr. Rodman can get his substance abuse under control.
We've had a bunch of emails about this, Lewis. Is there any part of you, and even if it's 0.1% a feeling in your mind, that Dennis Rodman may have been an operative of a U.S. intelligence agency when he did this entire North Korea thing?
I don't think so. Of course, they labeled him one anyway because he knows more about Kim Jong-un than anybody in the Western world. But yeah, I don't think so. I don't think he's the guy for that. I don't think he could even operate as someone like that.
You don't think he'd be the right guy to even do that? He wouldn't be able to stick to the plan.
Was defecating in the hallway part of the plan?
That rarely is part of anyone's plan, I feel like. If that happens, at some point you diverged from the plan.
Yeah, I just imagine that CIA meeting. Mr. Rodman, we need you to defecate in the hallway of this hotel.
This is going to be near the close of this operation. We're going to signal you, and at that point, please vomit and defecate in the hallway and then leave.
Incredible. Yeah. So I doubt that was part of the plan.
All right, that's This Week in Show History. We've got a great interview coming up. We're going to answer some of your questions. It is Friday. You can become a David Pakman Show member by going to davidpakman.com/membership, and make sure to follow me on Twitter, twitter.com/dpakman and twitter.com/davidpakmanshow for the show's Twitter account.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
This week's classic interview is connected to the anniversary of 9/11. On a prior 9/11 anniversary, we interviewed Sut Jolly. This was actually on the 10-year anniversary of 9/11. Sut Jolly was a college professor of mine. I also interned at his documentary company, the Media Education Foundation, when I was in college. And we really focused on the way in which 9/11 was used to achieve political goals. And I think that as the horror of 9/11 fades a little bit each year, as is the case with any tragic event in history, it's important to remember that the effects of 9/11 in terms of the geopolitical landscape extended incredibly deeply and still are a factor today. So today's classic interview is the 9/11 10th anniversary interview with Sut Jolly from the Media Education Foundation. Let's watch. We've been looking at a lot of different angles now 10 years after 9/11. And way back even when I had you as a professor, you were already talking about the use of 9/11 to justify, in many cases incorrectly, military action, domestic spying, Patriot Act, etc. And now that we've had a little bit more time, now that there's 10 years between 9/11 and where we are today, is that still going on to the same extent? Has it increased? Is it less of a concern now that Barack Obama, a supposedly progressive candidate, is president? Has it changed at all?
Well, just look where we are. We're still in Iraq and we're still in Afghanistan. I mean, we are in a permanent war economy. America will always be at war. Sometimes it will be made easier by events that are going on, but remember that the permanent war economy demands wars. And in that sense, 9/11 was a gift from heaven for the military-industrial complex, because they didn't even have to try to figure out how to increase military budgets. I mean, they were, if you remember, the neoconservatives were talking about how do we get the military budget up, and they thought only something really drastic would do it. 2 years later, they couldn't have dreamt in their dream. They couldn't have dreamt how large the military budget will become and how it's kept increasing since then. You asked about Obama. You look at Obama's military budget, it's actually bigger than the military budget, than in the past. I mean, this is irrespective of who's in charge. This is irrespective of Obama. There's a lot of hopes for Obama, but you have to remember, you don't become president of the United States by being a radical. The job of the president of the United States is to manage the empire. And that is Barack Obama's job.
There's a study I vividly remember looking at, I think in 2004, from PIPA, which pointed out how likely people were to support going into Iraq based on three particular misconceptions. One of those three misconceptions was that 9/11 was connected to Iraq, something that now we know to be completely untrue, something Colin Powell indicated he wasn't completely comfortable in making the case for, even though he was being pushed to do it. That was huge at the time, was it not? It's impossible to go back and say what would have been if that connection hadn't been made, but at the time, that was a really big deal in getting support for going into Iraq.
Well, they had to spend, remember, about a year and a bit to do the propaganda to link Saddam Hussein with 9/11 when there was no link, right? That required a lot of ideological work to do, to such an extent that after that year, the vast majority of the American population believed that somehow Iraq and Saddam Hussein was connected with 9/11. I think the vast majority of the American population still believes that. I think it's one of the really interesting things about how ideology works is that facts actually don't really make any difference anymore. even though everyone has now, even George Bush said it had nothing, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11.
Many times has been said, yeah.
But if you did the public opinion polls, that is still the predominant view. If you may remember when you were in my classes, I always used to quote Confucius, who said, who was once asked by someone, what would you do if you were ever in charge? What would you do if you ever to remain in power? And he said he would, quote, rectify the language. That is, if you can control the language, reality doesn't matter.
So there's the issue of the Iraq War, but then we saw it with the Patriot Act, warrantless wiretapping, CIA black sites, clearly against any international law. A lot of what was going on with extraordinary rendition, just kind of because of the narrative that exists since 9/11, people don't react in the visceral way with the outrage that maybe they would if that wasn't the context, right? I mean,
9/11 I think was one context. We also have to remember that there was a context already before 9/11 which really ramped up after it, which is anti-Arab ideology and Islamophobia. And that was what 9/11 kind of coalesced, was fear of the Arab world, fear of anyone who was different. And that fear was used in such a way. I mean, the film that we did, Hijacking Catastrophe, was called 9/11 Fear and the Selling of American Empire. And so that cultivation of fear was absolutely central to it. And to such, you may remember in Hijacking, we quote, I think I always get them mixed up, I think it's Goering. He said, you make a population scared, you can do whatever you want to them.
Corporate media has struggled a little bit, I think, with how to handle this issue of torture. And recently, it was definitely Wolf Blitzer on CNN. There was a way that he referred to waterboarding and other, I think the term was so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. And it's unbelievable because if he were to say which some consider torture, or which many consider torture, or which by international law are considered torture, he would be accused, Wolf Blitzer would be accused of being part of that so-called liberal media.
Just by referring
to it, right? So it's almost like we can't even get, number one, what is the unbiased way to refer to those techniques? I don't actually know the answer, but there's this fear in the corporate media of even appearing to be somewhat open to the fact that maybe it is torture. I think they don't really know how to go with it or how to handle that.
Because the moment you mention the word torture, then it conjures forward all kinds of things. So you just can't mention it.
Right.
You have to call it something else. Mm-hmm. But I actually think they could use it now. I think especially young people wouldn't bat an eyelid about it. I mean, they've grown up in this atmosphere of fear. They've grown up with video games. They've grown up with movies that have this as kind of commonsensical stuff, and so. Torture. I mean, it's one of the things as you said, why aren't people outraged at this? Why aren't people outraged at what is being done in the name of American values and American security, which is the last thing that's going to make America secure, is doing these kinds of things.
Is it a hard argument to counter when neoconservatives will say, even though there are legitimate concerns about what has been done by the government since 9/11, we haven't had another attack like it, and therefore it must somehow be working? Even if at face value you can say, well, it may be that there wasn't a similar attack attempted since then. We don't know. Some say there have, some say there haven't. Is that a hard argument to counter when you're making a critique?
It depends what you mean by the attacks. There's been lots of attacks in Iraq. I mean, that became then the focus of anti-American activity. And that's where people all over the world then went. And if you think that there haven't been attacks on Americans, all over the world since 9/11, then you're living in another world.
Sure.
And within, to the extent that we haven't had an attack here, although there have been domestic attacks, there have been other attacks by right-wingers.
Which, interestingly enough, are completely absent from, for example, New York Congressman Peter King's hearings about American Muslims. No mention of the 20-plus executed right-wing terror attacks, which are always portrayed in the media as lone wolf, unconnected from any kind of political discourse in the country.
And I mean, the Norway attacks was, I think, the perfect example of that. All right, when they first happened, I mean, the New York Times immediately linked it. They said to some jihadist groups because some, vague person on the internet said it was connected to it. I mean, that was the headline on online, and they called it terrorism. And the moment they found out actually that no, it wasn't actually a Muslim group, it wasn't a radical Muslim group, it was actually a homegrown Norwegian, Norwegian right winger, terrorism stopped being used, and it became, as you said, about this, this lone wolf.
He's crazy.
He's crazy, yeah.
Right.
And therefore, and so to the extent that terrorism now, it actually is a meaningless word. Terrorism only can be applied to Muslims and to Arabs, and any other kind of political violence is called something else.
Similar to saying that we are in a global war on terror has also, we've in a sense been desensitized to that. It's just a constant. It's what it always is. The United States is always in a global war against terror, is it not?
It is, and we have to remember that is good for certain interests within the United States. It's really good for the military-industrial complex, and I want to keep stressing that this is, and it's not even, it doesn't even require a conspiracy. This is an institutional, construction within the United States in terms of how the economy functions, in terms of how the military functions, that there are so many interests now in this that it has to keep going, and that it just needs excuses. Remember, for a long time, the system didn't require terrorism. For a long time, the system required an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, that was the Soviet Union.
The Cold War.
The Cold War, right? And then communist was the word for terrorism. When the Soviet Union collapsed, okay, what was going to then take the place of the enemy to justify 50 cents of every federal tax dollar going to the military-industrial complex? Okay, people just don't realize how much of their tax dollars go towards the military-industrial complex.
Sure, and our friends at the National Priorities Project do a very good job of actually breaking that down. We're speaking with Sut Jolly, Executive Director of the Media Education Foundation and University of Massachusetts professor. Over the last few years, we've seen the movement or the voices that want to offer critiques of 9/11 associated with the 9/11 conspiracy theorists, those who have claims, a variety of claims, including that thermite paint was being used inside of the World Trade Center for years to make it more flammable so that then the buildings would come down. Building 7, which we often hear about, that it's the Jews, that it's Bush and Cheney personally who allowed 9/11 to happen. Has this put your movie, Hijacking Catastrophe, in a negative light in some cases? Has it been difficult for you to unlink your critique and these conspiracy theories that abound?
It has been difficult. And people have put them together. Like the New Yorker did a series, or did a piece on these movies, and included Hijacking Catastrophe as one of these conspiracy films. For me, the most frustrating thing is that, over the past decade, the amount of energy, the amount of political energy that has been sucked into that movement and being sucked into these trying to answer these unanswerable questions. There are questions about 9/11. There is no doubt, and we need to figure out a way to ask them and to figure out how to answer them. And what the the so-called conspiracy movement, or the so-called truthers. I hate the term truthers because it implies the rest of us aren't interested in the truth.
Right.
Actually, I consider myself a 9/11 truther, but what I want to see is, what I want to look at is, okay, how was 9/11 used since it happened to then justify this incredible expansion of the military, this incredible retraction in our civil liberties? I think that should be the real truth movement.
Which is a very separate question from was Building 7 a controlled demolition?
It's a very separate question. If I was Bush, and if I was the neoconservatives, whatever, that's the question I'd want people to focus on. It's an unanswerable question. And these people must probably, it's like the Kennedy assassination people. 50 years later, they're still trying to figure out who assassinated Kennedy. It's a total waste of energy and total waste of people's resources.
So what do you say to those who would point out to you, well, hold on a second, there is evidence that does bring up what appear to be legitimate questions about Building 7. Your question is good, your critique is good, but why are we just ignoring all of those things? Because not all the questions are answered. Why is it really a waste of time if we are to believe that there is something to find out?
Well, as long as that question is asked within a whole frame of a whole bunch of other questions as well, which is just not just about that one day. And I know the temptation. When I first, I'm not too sure if you took my class at that time, but in fact, I remember I read almost the first American book on this, because it was David Ray Griffin's book, The New Pearl Harbor, and it's compelling because it tells a story. Here are these unanswered questions. Why did this happen? Why weren't the planes shot down? Why did Building 7 collapse? What happened to the steel that was left over? Why was it moved out so quickly? And I remember actually, when I first got it, when I first looked at this, it made total sense. In fact, I did a lecture on it, where a lot of people were very upset actually that I was asking these kinds of questions. And then actually, I heard a debate between David Ray Griffin and a guy called Chip Berlay on Democracy Now. And the moment you start to get into a debate, and the moment you start to kind of open up some of these assumptions, you realize it's like a house of cards. And so the moment this debate started happening, I realized, oh, wow, I essentially bought this story too quickly. And I think for many people, they bought the story and they've never changed. Once you bought the story, so it's like
the initial questions are compelling enough. Then people,
it's like faith. It's you kind of just have, once you bought it, then because there are no answers to it. That's the thing. There aren't and that's the beauty of it, is that the questions are important. You have to answer the questions, but there are no answers to it.
We've been speaking with Sut Jolly, Executive Director of the Media Education Foundation. The screenings are on September 11th at Smith College in Northampton's Wright Hall. 2 p.m., Hijacking Catastrophe. 4 p.m., War Made Easy. You will be there with Vijay Prashad answering questions.
Yes.
Thanks so much for coming in.
Sure, my pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
It's the end of the week. It is time for your audience questions. You can send these questions in via voicemail, call 219-2DAVID-P, or just leave them as an email. Go to davidpakman.com, click on Contact Us. First question is from Jared. Would you support a justice system that has no lawyers and is just a few judges who decide on cases, sentences, etc.? Lewis, didn't you at one point suggest something like this?
Well, I questioned the, let me adjust my mic here. I questioned the jury system. Maybe there's not a better way to do things, but I thought that perhaps juries should be experts, trained, evaluated, paid.
Which some countries have.
Right. And I thought that would be better than risking having a bunch of brainless idiots as a jury.
Yeah, that's a different question, really, than the one we're addressing here. So let's address this one. No lawyers, just judges. So you don't have lawyers, but you also don't have juries making their case. Here's the problem with this. By the very definition of how this justice system works, judges don't go out and accuse you of crimes, right? The police, presumably, or other federal authorities observe or gather information about an alleged crime that you've committed. And they, in conjunction with the state, right, the district attorney, decide to bring charges forward. So if you're going to get rid of lawyers, in quotations, then who is bringing the charges, right? And then that's really where you get into the issue. Because if you said, well, the state brings the charges and the defendant, the suspect, just presents their side and a judge decides, I would be very much against that, because you have on one side individuals whose job is to put together cases to be presented, not to a jury, to a judge. And then on the other hand, you have someone who's just suspected of a crime and is incredibly unequal. So in that sense, the defendant would absolutely need a lawyer. So then how do we get rid of all lawyers? If you're going to get rid of defense lawyers, you also need to somehow make the prosecuting entity not lawyers. And I don't know exactly how you do that, Lewis. Is it just, if the police see you doing something, the police officer who is accusing you of the crime shows up, and the person accused of the crime shows up, and both present their stories to the judge? I mean, even then, police officers would be trained in the law, and they would become almost kind of like proxy lawyers for their own cases. So I don't see a way in which you could have a fair and proper playing field for the defendant if you either have trained police who are in charge of bringing forth cases. They're not lawyers per se, but they would become lawyers in a sense.
And let's just say that these cases always come down to a decision being made by a judge. I don't know, maybe two judges. After all the stories we've covered about judges saying and doing completely outrageous things based on their racism or biases or whatever, I don't think that would be a solid system. I think people are too imperfect, and I think you do need to have something like a jury comprised of many people. I just don't think that it should be everyday Joes.
I mean, it could be a panel of 6 or 12 judges, right? I mean, then you're kind of mitigating in the same way that an individual juror could have biases. You're kind of mitigating that risk with judges as well. But you're making a good point, which is even if we could figure out a way to make the lack of equal representation fair, even if we could get past that, then I would question whether, if the idea is a judge, one judge decides these cases, I don't think I like that idea either. So, Louis, for as asked, my answer is no. I'm open to persuasion from the audience if they can see a way to make this work.
Right. My answer would also be no. And I'm sure we'll get some feedback on this one.
Okay, this is kind of not the type of question we normally answer, but it's actually a question that's been asked many times, incredibly. Carl wants to know, who would win in a fight, Superman versus Batman? Louis, do you have established thoughts on this?
I do. Actually, I have thought about this before.
I have too, so I will allow you to go first.
All right. Are you going to allow me to answer this first?
Please.
I have to. There are two different situations here. One is these two run into each other somewhere. Neither one of them knows that they're about to run into the other, and for some reason a fight breaks out. Okay, if that happens, Superman wins, hands down. He is the Man of Steel. He is practically invincible. But let's say that this battle is going to take place in a predetermined place at a predetermined time, and there is time for planning here. Batman is very rich and very, very smart. If Batman can plan this, and if Superman can plan this, I think Batman wins the fight. If there's planning, and if this happens in that way.
Yeah, not the least of which, Louis, would be as a result of the fact that you mentioned Batman is smart. I question Superman's intelligence. I feel like Superman might be kind of dumb, and I have two reasons for thinking this. Number one, his costume for people to not recognize him is glasses. Okay, so if you think that people aren't going to recognize you if you just put on a pair of glasses as Clark Kent, you may not be that smart. And number two, somehow he always ends up where there's kryptonite. It's the one thing, Louis. It's from another planet. It's the one thing he's susceptible to. And somehow he ends up showing up somewhere and there's kryptonite, and he doesn't figure out a way to avoid being exposed to kryptonite. However, I will say this, in spite of Batman's intelligence, Superman's heat vision, right? I don't know what the range is on that heat vision. And he also has the freezing breath where he can blow cold air and freeze someone. At a distance, whatever it is Batman figures out to do, you would think that from a distance, with a combination of the freezing breath and the heat vision, that Superman would be able to either able to burn up or just freeze Batman.
Batman will find a way. Batman always finds a way. He's a genius. And just like, Lex Luthor's a genius too, and he's given Superman, a hell of a time within some of these battles. And I think Batman's smarter than Lex Luthor. So I think if there's planning, I give it to Batman. If it's a spontaneous encounter, I would give it to Superman.
All right. Hopefully that answer satisfies Carl. That's about all I've got on the Superman-Batman controversy. Caleb wrote to me, and this is kind of a follow-up on, if we were to meet alien life, is it smart or not smart to assume that they would be friendly to us? We had that discussion. So Caleb wrote in and said, let's assume we make contact with alien life, and let's assume they are friendly for a second here, okay? They just so happen also to speak a language we can understand on Earth, which is obviously another question. How on earth would we communicate with an alien species? Let's assume they're friendly. Let's assume they get here. Let's assume we can even communicate with them in something equivalent to a human language. Would we still be able to communicate effectively is the question. And Caleb goes on to say, they might have a different name for planets and galaxies. We might want to compare notes and see what discoveries they've made versus what discoveries we've made. But think about it. We call it Mars. They might call it something else entirely. Wait a second, they might not even understand what we're trying to say when we talk about planets. I don't think we can just say to them, hey, what do you know about the existence of water on Mars over the last however many billion years? And have them even understand what planet we're talking about. Better yet, who has to change the names of the planets? Did humans discover Mars first, so we call it Mars? Did the aliens? Who has naming rights on planets? They might have discovered a planet 50,000 years before we did, so should we switch the name of the planet to what they call it? So Lewis, Caleb presenting a lot of very rudimentary, nitty-gritty, logistical questions about what would happen if we were to meet aliens, but this gets at a broader issue, which is how on earth would we have effective communication with an intelligent alien species if we were ever to encounter one?
We can figure that out. I think that would be the least of our worries.
Really?
First of all, yeah. I think if they come here and make contact with us and try to communicate with us, I think we can assume that they're friendly. And I don't think that would be a problem. I just, assuming they are highly, highly intelligent, perhaps they're the ones who would figure out an effective way to communicate with us.
What if they're us? But hold on. Let's say when we talk about highly intelligent, let's make this a little more specific. They're at our level of intelligence plus 20 years, right? Let's say that in 20 years' time, we will really make exponential progress on interstellar travel. They're us plus 20 years of intelligence.
Well, I don't think you mean to use the word intelligence there. That's just advancement, right? Doesn't necessarily mean equate to intelligence.
Oh, you're saying that they're just inherently more intelligent beings, the way a dog is compared to an ant, for example.
But maybe that's not the case. I don't know. I just think that how would it really be any different from us trying to communicate with someone who speaks, I don't know, strictly Aramaic, right? You use drawings. You use diagrams.
Yeah,
you use pictures.
But hold on, I disagree. You know why?
Words are not the only way to communicate.
Hold on, I agree that they're not. But let me give you an example. Actually, I'll ask you a question. Let me try to show my view by asking a question. You're familiar with maps, right, Lewis?
I am aware of these things you call maps.
So if I were to pull out my phone and pull up Google Maps and say, hey, did you know that this is where Brussels was in relation to Amsterdam? And I show you on the map. I don't need to explain to you what the map is, right? Like you understand already, okay, this is a phone. The phone has apps. This is what maps look like. I'm looking at a map on the screen, and this is a two-dimensional representation of what the planet looks like from above. Like you understand all that stuff, right?
I would understand that, and I would think that an alien would understand that.
So the question is this: are you saying that someone a human from a few thousand years ago and an alien species that is completely different than the human race in every sense of the word would have an equal chance of understanding what you're trying to communicate to them by showing them a paper map? Is that the argument you're making? It's the same.
I'm not saying someone from 2,000 years ago. I'm saying someone who speaks a different language, lives today, and presumably understands what a map is just as well as the alien understands what a map is.
Oh, okay. Well, then my question, then it's not even a question. Obviously, the person who lives today is going to have a far better understanding.
I know Aramaic was maybe a bad way to say.
I assumed you meant a long time ago. Yeah.
No. Just the language barrier.
No, then I completely disagree with you, Lewis. I mean, if you show a map, a paper map to an alien species, we're speculating now, but there is zero reason to think, and I know we're going to get emails, and I predict that they will agree with me. There is no reason to think that someone who today is shown a map and they just speak a different language than you is going to have the same understanding of what that map represents than an alien species. Come on, Lewis.
You have to put it into context. You don't just start with a zoomed in image of Brooklyn.
Okay, that's fine. But how do you put it into context when you have no way to communicate?
Well, first you show them a picture of the planet. Then you say this is the planet. Then you say, okay, this is the European continent here. You see, this is a zoomed in image of the planet that you know you're on.
And in what language?
Even further.
In what language do you say this?
You just point. They're just pictures. So you don't need to say it.
You're just silently pointing to the map.
Start big. This is how you communicate. This is how you David, this is how you communicate.
Please let me know if you think communication with friendly, intelligent aliens, right? We're assuming all that. Would communication be more on the simple side that Lewis is presenting, or would it be closer to the difficult side that I'm presenting?
I didn't say it would be simple. I said it would happen. I said we would make it work. I didn't say it would be simple.
Definitely send me your thoughts on this. I assume the audience will disagree significantly on this, and we'll see what people have to say. You can also ask your questions for next week. 219-2DAVID-P is the voicemail number, or email us. We will talk to you in minutes on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.